All right, what do you even do with all the things that you learn from online courses? And let me ask you, are you and your team ready to apply what you are learning consistently and measurably? Today on Live with Laura, I'm super excited to be talking with Chris Taylor, the founder of Actionable. Hey, Chris. So,
Ah,
since 2008, Actionable has been helping corporate learners apply what they learn consistently and measurably. So, welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining me.
thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this, Laura.
Yeah, me too. So, I entitled this, why e-learning is broken. And that was something you made to me. So let's start there. Like, why do you believe that e-learning is broken? And I know you said, there's a solution. So let's start with why it's broken.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
then
it's
we
that
can look at the solution.
stir the pot contrarian comment out of the gate. Be like, what do you mean e-learning is broken?
Let's
Um,
let's
so
do
I,
this.
I'm going to soften it immediately, being Canadian. I think e-learning is brilliant. I think it has sped up the economy, our learning cycles, in a whole bunch of ways, but in very specific and far more limited application than I think it gets broadly applied to. That's my that's my starting
Okay.
caveat. And
All
here's why.
right.
Because here, I'll just pull up a quick visual. So
Hit
this,
me.
if we can, there we go.
Yeah,
So
there we
this
go.
very simple model we call the learning heartbeat, or the impact, insight action flywheel. But basically, it's around how we learn as adults, really as humans, but as adults. There's an insight. There's a moment where we say, "Oh, there's something missing for me. There's something that I need to learn." So then we go consume content. Content helps us understand how to make change happen. Depending on the environment that we learn something in, then we get the context. We get the how from the content, but then we get the why. For me personally, there's that deeper connection
Mhm.
to what's the motivation that's going to break the inertia of status quo. Right. For most of us, if we are fortunate enough to have the technology and the time to be watching this conversation right now, we've got lots of resources at our disposal. There's very little urgency in most cases for us to change behaviors. But let's assume for a second that we've found that deep why, that personal reason. Then we engage in the very difficult work of changing behaviors, that action phase. And if we do it in a way that captures reflection, then we can continue that cycle. The reason
Right.
that e-learning doesn't work in most cases, particularly when it comes to soft skill development, is that it is a great vehicle for transferring content. Where if we know the pain that we have, i.e., insight, and then we go out and we find the content that serves us, then a whole bunch of things have to happen in order for us to actually make change. We have to watch the thing
Mhm.
or read it. We have to consume it in its entirety without usually many distractions. That helps us at a cerebral level. But then we need to find the so what, the reason why. And in my experience, that's extremely difficult to do on your own in front of a computer screen. There's a
Yeah.
small percentage of the population that has the sort of fortitude to do the work of digging through the content to say, what in here is relevant to me? Why is it relevant? How am I going to engage in change? What sort of support systems am I going to put in place? How am I then going to go through the work of, conscious incompetence through to being in a place where I'm actually leveled up, right? I've engaged in a new habit.
Yeah.
So few people have the experience or the wherewithal to do that work. And e-learning makes the assumption that we're going to consume content and then take action on it. And in most cases,
Mhm.
context layer, the why, is missing. So there's my rant.
Okay, so does that model that you talked about suit all learning styles?
Mm,
Like the way different people learn? Like we talk about kids learning differently, but so do adults. So in the context of, that flywheel,
yeah.
does that fit all of the different styles of learners?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a great question now that I ponder it, because I don't think it's come up in the last 10 years that I've been talking about this model. So well done, Laura.
Ooh.
Um,
Oh, wow. Okay. Putting
the
you on the hot seat.
so the fundamentals of it is we need to understand how to change, and we need to have a reason to want to change.
Yeah.
Those are irrespective of learning style, or as far as medium. Are we auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, etc.? It's separate from how we're finding the why, for me, so the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
So I would I would say it stands up. There's universal truth to it. We need to know how, and we do have a reason why in order to change. How we get those things, I think, to your point, is it's important that it's varied by learning style, and for that reason, e-learning works for an even smaller percentage of the population, which is why you see more e-learning platforms going with sort of multi-threaded modality, right, where we get audio and video and text and exercise and scenarios, and all of those are designed to attract different learning styles. They're all, for the most part, still focused on getting it to stick around how to make change happen. We're largely missing the why. That why, in my experience, most consistently comes through reflection and dialogue, having conversations with other people, getting their perspectives, having an opportunity to share, and test stuff out as it sort of learn through talking, certain personality styles. That's so often missing from traditional e-learning, that one-to-screen approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the problem, right? That we're missing that piece. So what is the solution? How can that be fixed? How can people creating the programs or the learners, like, is it both sides that need to do something different?
For sure. And I think we saw some really interesting evolutionary leaps in corporate learning in particular, which is my sort of wheelhouse, during the pandemic. As corporate learning moved from largely classroom based to pretty much exclusively online, there was a very rapid learning curve for the industry globally, where we went from, well, we'll do the full day session that we do live, now we'll do it on Zoom. Oh, turns out people get exhausted after a full day, so let's shorten it. Oh, it turns out that just talking at them through the screen doesn't actually drive behavior change. There's something in the way the facilitator does things in the room that doesn't translate. We'll do small breakout groups. Oh, that's actually, turns out that's working a lot better, is to give people time and space to discuss. As an industry, I've joked / not joking that we went through a 10-year evolution in the learning and development industry in about 18 months, which was exhausting for everyone involved.
I'm sure.
And hugely beneficial, I believe, to the industry at large. So as far as solutions are concerned, there's lots of different ways to slice this, but some of the things that we've learned, maybe a tiny bit of context would be useful. So I run Actionable.co. We do behavior change, both sustainment and measurement of behavior change, specifically on corporate learning. Every year we do an analysis of a large data set, the largest globally that I know of, around corporate learning behavior change attempts and what's working and what's not. So the study that we have coming out later this month had about 35,000 individuals included in the study, looking at what are the levers that creates lasting behavior change following a learning session. We've identified 12 of them. I'm not going to go into detail on all of them, but there's a couple sort of high level components that I think might be worthwhile.
Yeah.
And if you're watching this and you're not in corporate learning and you're still here, thank you for still being here. What I'd encourage you to do is to flip it in your mind to, as a learner, what vehicles can I put in place to ensure that I am creating behavior change following the session? Because my question to you is, if you are engaged in learning and not looking to change your behaviors following that learning, what are you doing there?
Yeah.
Like,
Great question.
There may very well be a legitimate answer to it, right? But it's an important question to ask, to say, what's the purpose of me investing the time, even if it was free from a dollar standpoint, for me to invest the time into this training, whatever that looks like? Why? What's the outcome that I'm striving towards? Okay. Do you just want a couple of them, Laura? You want me to go through?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Give us, like, I don't know, what are the ones that would be, some key ones that you think would be easy for people to kind of take and go, okay, I understand this concept, or I know what I could do from this.
Content context ratio is huge. So as someone designing programs, we'll start there. As someone designing programs, if you've got a 90-minute slot, what we have found is that you want a 3-to-1 at a minimum, ideally 5-to-1 ratio between context and content, which means for every 10 minutes of new content that you're providing to the audience, you want to allow at least half an hour, ideally 50 minutes, to give the participants exercises, discussion questions, prompts, scenarios for them to turn over in their mind the so what with this content. One one little trick, you can't tell them so what. This is so often, particularly in corporate programs, like, well, we'll tell them why it matters to the organization. That's useful as a data point, but that's not accomplishing the so what for the individual, right? Sorry, but they have their own motivations, their own desires, their own reasons for wanting to engage in change. So ratio of 3-to-1, 5-to-1, ideally, would be a key component. If you're a participant attending a session, let's say you're going to a day-long conference, you have to assume that it's going to be at least the inverse of that the majority of your time is going to be spent on the receiving end of the fire hose of information.
I've been there.
Right, we all have. And it's the nature of the beast. I think the industry has long been focused on how much content can we squeeze into the limited amount of time we have, because the relationship has been more content equals more value. What I would suggest is greater behavior change creates more value. Content for content's sake is just noise. Could be entertaining noise, but it's just noise.
Yeah.
So if I'm attending a conference as a participant, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but for every day of conference that you're in, you would theoretically want to allow 3 days minimum of doing nothing but reviewing your notes and digesting and figuring out relevance.
Wow.
You're not going to do that.
Does nobody ever.
Nobody does, exactly. So, one example though, on the flip side, or to sort of find the happy medium, I've got an event I go to every year, 3 times a year, and it's 2.5 days of fairly fast-paced content. I turn that into a 4-day week. So I like on site at the venue, I'll book a hotel room for the extra 2 nights. So I will allow myself a day and a half where the whole purpose of that day and a half is to really digest what I've just consumed, knowing that at least half of this I'm not going to have the ability to implement. But if I can pick out the 1 or 2 or 3 key ideas, which can only really be done in a meaningful way through that, turn it over, figure out relevance, plug it into the rest of your life and business goals and life goals, to say which pieces actually matter enough to me here that I'm going to stick with this long enough to make a lasting change.
Yeah.
So that 3-to-1 ratio is pretty key. The other piece is to, I'll jump all the way around the model, to appreciate that very little change happens in a vacuum. Almost always, right? Even if it's a mindset shift and not something that the public or people around you might see, they're still in your space. And so understanding the social elements that either become detractors or enablers on your change is really important. You can do this through 2 that you have control over, arguably 3 vehicles. One is choose an accountability partner. We've all had them, gym buddy, right? Study buddy, whatever. Find somebody that you can express the behavior change commitment to and ask them to proactively check in with you, where they're actually going to be reaching out to say, hey, how's it going so far? Where are you stuck? Where are the wins? It's not just hey, I'm doing this thing, but actually engaging them in the process will flip a potential detractor past neutral into enabler, and will give you some accountability, obviously, hence the name. That by itself, we've seen an 87% rise in someone's follow through on realizing behavior change when they have an accountability partner. Just ask somebody, make it clear what you're working on.
Interesting.
So that's one. That's more of an active support role. The other is more of a passive support role, where you can tell the people around you what you're working on. No ask, but so that they're aware. What that does is 2 things. One, it creates some grace for you. I think so often when we make commitments to change, we forget that we're pretty terrible at things the first time we do them. And then we go and do them and we fall down, sometimes literally. And then we go, that's not for me. I'm not that, right? Which is not, we need to work through that, right? That conscious incompetence layer of being okay with the messiness of trying to figure stuff out becomes a whole heck of a lot easier when you've let people know around you that you are trying to do the new thing. They will give you, at least they'll give you the space to fall down. But what you'll find more often than not is people are like, oh, I actually did something like that, and here's what I learned and found, and they get more content. But that can become really powerful. The second reason why that sort of shared visibility is important is something called the Hawthorne effect, which people may be familiar with or not. But it's the idea that, and well studied, understanding that when you feel like you're being observed, you're more likely to engage in the right behaviors. So if you've told people what you're working on, then you kind of want to follow through on that, right? Because you don't want to be like, I thought you were doing that thing. Respond to that. So there's a lot more, Laura, but I've been talking a lot. So
no, oh my gosh, I'm like listening. I'm like, ooh, how can I apply this? Okay, so a couple things. I'm very happy to hear that I'm doing a lot of things right with my online. It's funny. It's like sometimes people call it a course, but I'm like, it's not a course because we're actually doing the work. Like, it's not like here, just learn all this stuff, take it away. But we're actually building the foundation of their brand. We are developing all of their key messaging, and we're doing it together in a group setting virtually. I did do it in person, pre-pandemic, obviously. And now I get to do it from Sicily or wherever I happen to be at the time. But your ratio, I would say I'm probably right on the money, because I do very little teaching in the sessions. It's like, here's the content, right? Like high level, this is what you need to do. They have time to do the work. Then the rest of the time is discussions, sharing, and like, oh, hey, that's the same for me. I'm totally gonna like other people saying stuff will prompt somebody else to think about something for their business. And so it's a very, very interactive. But I used to do it as a 2-day intensive, and I was like, there is no way I can do a 2-day Zoom anything like, and nobody can, right?
No. And it's one of the silver linings, I think, to the sort of forced move of most learning into a virtual environment is that we can't do 2 full days back to back, or anybody that pretends they can is lying to themselves or their boss. And so because of that, we break it into smaller pieces, and we typically put space between them, which actually lends itself really nicely to the flywheel, right? Of I learn some content, I find the context, I take action. I reflect on that, I repeat, as opposed to all the content, all the context, right? That's another thin slicing learning, and the idea of going into one concept at a time is really powerful. So I love that you're doing that. I went on a bit of a tangent earlier because you specifically asked the question, what can we do to fix it? What you just said, right? Those group discussions. I love what Wes is doing at Maven, where it's the what do they call them? What do they call them? It's the cohort-based classes, CBCs. Is that right? Cohort-based courses.
Okay.
But the idea that there's content online, but then we're going to consume it on our own time. But then we're gonna do the context layer together, which it sounds like you're doing as well. Which is that works. It's really effective.
Yeah. Because what I found is you can put all the like I've got tons of content. I even did this as like a DIY, like follow the curriculum, do the thing. Nobody, I mean, almost nobody signed up for it. And the people who did were like, somebody asked for a refund like 8 months later because she didn't do it. I was like, you've had access to, so I'm like, forget it. Like, I'm not even gonna, because you can show anybody and teach anybody anything online, right? But it's the learning as a collaborative thing and getting that outside perspective. And so I break it up over 6 sessions, like 2-hour sessions over 2 weeks. So it's still intensive, but there's a day in between to think about and process. And then I have a group chat that we do in between. But the one thing that you mentioned was an accountability buddy. And I would say that majority of the people do implement, especially if they have us do the design work, but they do implement the new language and that we've worked on, but sometimes people don't. And I wonder if creating accountability buddies within the cohort to say, hey, you're now buddied up with each other. You need to make sure that that person has updated their LinkedIn profile with their new, tagline, or they've updated this. And I think that accountability, like you said, allows people to feel like, ooh, okay, somebody's going to be checking up on me, and I like that idea. And just putting things out in the universe, saying that you're going to do stuff might inspire somebody else. It might have somebody say, hey, I've done this, or I've not done that, or I'm interested in this. And who knows what could come from just sharing.
100%.
So I love those ideas.
The idea with accountability partners is interesting because a big piece of it is the autonomy for the individual to choose to have an accountability partner or to choose who their accountability partner is. So in environments where you as the designer want them to have accountability partners. There's two tracks that can work well for that. So one is to set the rule that we're having an accountability partner, give them the choice as to who is their accountability partner. Basically, anytime we can give people greater autonomy around time, task, technique, or team. Those it's from Dan Pink's Drive, for those who are familiar with it.
Okay.
Will increase their level of autonomy or sense of ownership over the project, and they're more likely to lean in. It's that, the image that I have in my head all the time, which is terrible, but it's in my head, is if you've ever had a dog on a leash and then tried to take the dog somewhere, the dog's immediate reaction is to like go the other direction, right? From whichever way you're pulling. There's a percentage of the population that when you tell them what it is you need them to do, they're immediately going to resist, even if they would have come to that conclusion on their own. So one thought, tell them you're going to have a buddy, give them choice on where. If you want to organize them, and there's often times where that's highly appropriate, triads over pairs. If you can put people into groups of 3, you'll statistically substantially increase the likelihood that that group will continue to do the things they're supposed to do. Because the triangle's strong. I don't honestly know what the behavioral science is behind why a triad works better. Because it's not like more is better, 4 is bad, 3 is
just go with it.
Yeah, totally. Other people have done the research, but that can work really well.
It's like hygge,
No, what is
the Danish word hygge? No. Hygge. It's like it's a big. So I'm half Danish, so I live there. So there's this word hygge, and the closest English word means cozy. But you can't, it's not even, we just don't have enough words in the English language. And so now it's a concept from Denmark that is being there's books about it, and it's a feeling, it's like lighting temperature, it's the number of people, like a dinner party. So between 4 to 6 people is the optimal number for hygge. But if you have less, but if you have 8, then you have a table that's split into 2 groups. And I've witnessed this. It's like, oh my gosh, you totally do. If you have 6 people, you might have a couple of small conversations, but you'll more often be talking as a group.
Right.
But as soon as you hit 8 people, you're going to have 2 totally separate conversations. So, I mean, why? Who knows? There might be science behind it, but just like you said, why is a triad stronger than a pair? Sometimes you just got to leave that up to it works. Let's just go with it.
I love those underlying sort of human truths, right? That's for the vast majority of the population, that's going to be the case. It's there's something that connects us all, which is beautiful.
Exactly. So you help people with that consistency and measuring kind of the learning. So how do you measure the ROI? How and what is the ROI people should be looking for with e-learning?
Oh, this is the $1 million question, right? Or multi-billion dollar question. How do you get an ROI?
Don't you have the answer, Chris?
I've got pieces of the answer, Laura. No, I don't. I think it's one of those delicious challenges that we continue to pursue. The pieces that I've put together so far that work for me and the clients that we work with is starting from the Kirkpatrick-Phillips model. For those who aren't familiar with this is 2 gentlemen, Don Kirkpatrick, Jack Phillips, about 40 years apart, I believe, basically said there's a hierarchy to return on investment with learning. And then they put their models together and created the Kirkpatrick-Phillips model. There's a whole bunch of critics for good reason around it, but stick with me for a second. Basically, what the Kirkpatrick-Phillips model says is that your bottom level from sort of an ROI measurement standpoint is participant satisfaction. And any of us who have ever been in a training course know these forms, right? What did you like the speaker? Did you like the sandwiches? Was the air temperature just being a little facetious? But very
too hot, too cold,
right. But it's around what did I like as the participant? So that's the base layer. It's important, but it's not enough. The second layer is knowledge retention. And this is where we come back and survey people 3, 6, 9 months later and say, hey, how much did you remember from the session? And I was shocked when I came across the stat from the Association of Training and Development that said that 92% of organizations stop measuring at knowledge retention. Basically meaning the closest that they're getting to ROI is, do people remembered stuff? Not did they apply it? Did that application have the positive impact we were hoping for? What was the value of that positive impact? But just, did they remember? Do they have more stuff in their heads now? which to me is just
Excellent.
silly.
Just what we need.
Yeah, exactly. The third layer up is around behavior change. And this is where, through my work with Actionable, we've been laser focused is, can we demonstrate that individuals are shifting their behaviors as a result of the training that they've consumed? And I can get into how we do that. But that layer becomes key for me, as it's the bridge from the classroom experience to the workplace impact. We don't know yet if that behavior change is doing what it's supposed to do. We just know that people are acting in a new way. Just to finish the model for those people who are like me and get twitchy if you don't get all the layers. Level
Yeah.
4 is around organizational impact, different language for it, but business impact. Basically, are the behavior changes that are taking place having the positive effect on KPIs that we care about? And then the fifth layer is true ROI, which is effectively, if you ladder up, are the behavioral changes that are taking place driving KPIs in a way that when the KPI moves, we can say, well, that KPI movement equals X dollars, and therefore we can take the revenue generated or cost saved and compare it to how much we invested in the program in the first place.
Interesting.
What I find fascinating is how many times trainers and consultants that we support, Actionable typically sits behind consultants in the work that they're doing. They've put together a great program for the clients based on content or subject matter expertise, right? Here's what I'm really good at. Do you want to buy it? And then the client says, well, how are you going to measure the impact of that? And the consultant goes, well, how would you like me to measure the impact of that? And they go, well, I don't know. We don't really know. It's largely because the conversation hasn't been had around what was the business objective that determined this was a valuable use of dollars, spend, time, energy. What business objective said this would be a worthwhile investment in order to achieve? If you park training entirely temporarily and go to the boardroom table, the executive team is shaping the strategic objectives for the year. And they say, here's the new strategic objectives we're trying to achieve. Assumedly, those are different than outcomes they've had in the past. Different outcomes require different actions, different behaviors, if you will, different strategic capabilities, but different ways of being. And then in a very crude sort of model, the organization has the option of either buying those skill sets or building those skill sets, developing those skill sets. If they buy, they might hire people, they might acquire a company, they might hire contractors. That's that sort of branch. If we're going to build, then we're going to invest in people development, because that's how we build people, is we invest in their development.
Yep.
There's a logic path that's taking place there, whether it's explicit or implicit, something that's saying we need to develop leaders that are better retention magnets. And we are doing that because we have really high voluntary turnover numbers. It's costing us $7 million a year. We need to reduce the hiring costs and, headhunters and all that stuff. So we need to have our leaders be better at retaining talent. That conversation takes place at the boardroom. In way too many cases, that then gets packaged and handed off to HR or L&D with a, hey, we need a leadership program and you've got a budget of $100,000. And they turn around and go, okay, who does the best leadership program? Well, there is no best leadership program, right? They're beyond a certain caliber of, quality of content and delivery and facilitation. It's got to be around fit to the need, right?
Yeah.
The skills that we're going to develop to have leaders be better retention magnets are very different than the skills we're going to develop if our real business challenge is we're off on targets, or we have major safety incidents on site, or we have apathy. People aren't leaving, but they're not doing work either. Right? And so you asked the question, how do we measure ROI? And you got me going here, Laura.
I love
The
it.
only way that we can measure ROI is to know what we were trying to achieve in the first place.
Yeah.
And so when we know what we're trying to achieve, the example I used earlier, a reduction in voluntary turnover, what are the KPIs that we want to look at? That one's pretty easy. Voluntary turnover numbers, right? Are people quitting on a monthly basis? Okay. So now we want to say, what are the behavioral shifts required in leaders of those areas? Because it might not be the whole organization, right? It might just be these functions. Yeah. What behaviors are missing that we need to develop in order to have the skills now that lead to better KPIs of that KPI? And then we work backwards to the content. Now, when we've designed the program, implemented the program, if we have a system by which we're measuring behavior change, this is why why I created Actionable, was that there was a gap in the market around measuring behavior change, supporting and measuring. is to say these behavior changes are happening, and it's done in a way that everyone agrees. Yes, that is irrefutable. Those behavior changes are happening. Okay. Can we then start to correlate those groupings of individuals that are shifting certain behaviors and any sort of lagging indicator change we're seeing on the KPIs, in this case, voluntary turnover? This has been the challenge with ROI measurement in learning since the beginning, is the time lag between the learning event and when it might show up on
Mhm.
KPIs. By measuring behavior
Yeah, it
change,
could be 6 months, a year, it could be a long time.
it's so many factors, right? And it depends on how often they measure it, and are they even, because I mean, I think we just sort of gave up as an industry probably 20 years ago, where
Yeah.
we said, well, we're just not going to try anymore. And so we've stopped identifying which KPIs. There's a rigor, we call it outcome design, but there's a rigorous process. It's not onerous, but it's a discipline to say, what are the metrics before we make any investment? What are the metrics? It would be like spending money on marketing but not really knowing what you're trying to achieve. If you talk to a marketing manager and be like, you know, you've got a budget of $500,000 to spend on marketing, it's like, that's ridiculous. But why? Like, you would never just end the conversation there, right? It starts from a place of, what are we trying to achieve from a
Yeah.
lead gen standpoint, quality, blah blah blah, and then it would turn into, what's the budget we need to achieve that. For some reason, well, I know why. It's because L&D is perceived as a cost center in too many cases. It's, here's your fixed budget, as opposed to, if your
Mhm.
marketing director comes to you and says, hey, it turns out when I put $1 in over here, I can generate 5. How much money can I have? They go, well, how much can we give you? Right. Because
Right.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I,
I often say that with marketing, that you can't, you could say, oh, I need to market this, but if you don't understand what the business is all, like if you don't have the brand behind it, right? Like what are you marketing?
yeah.
Like you could be wasting time and money and effort. And I've talked to people like that. They're like, I've invested, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in, Facebook ads. And I'm like, and they've gotten nothing. I'm like, but you don't have the language or the brand. Like, what are you even telling people? So it's looking at things through a completely different lens. And what you just said, it's like, it's not just about a blanket, we just need to fix leadership, we need to provide that for everybody. It's like, where are the areas and what are the specific areas of leadership
Yep.
within the organization that need to have an impact, and having the clear understanding of like, why are you doing this and what are the outcomes you're looking for,
Yep.
then it's something you can actually measure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and again, doing the work of identifying what you're going to be measuring. Like, how do you know if it's successful? That's the question. Because I would do the same thing with Facebook, the people putting money into Facebook, right? Being like, well, how will you know if it's successful? It's like, we'll have more business. It's like, okay, but that's not specific enough to know what levers to pull to improve this thing, right? It's around cost per acquisition, or it's around volume of display, or it's, what is the thing, right, that you're trying to achieve, and what's the hypothesis on the investment, and then how do you iterate? And
Yeah,
the same discipline can and should be applied to people development.
absolutely. We didn't even get into, look at the time, we didn't even get into AI and like the next, I mean, I think we need to just have a part two and talk about what that's going to look like when it comes to learning and all of that. Because I think that's, the pandemic sped up the learning. Like you said, it went from, 10 years into 18 months. And you see that in so many different areas that sped up. And I think AI is definitely going to have an impact on the e-learning world as well.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows where
Absolutely.
it's going to go?
Well,
So
instead of doing a
let's have
part
a part
two,
two
why don't we
before
just
we.
extend this out to 8 hours and we'll
Yeah,
just talk at people for, no, I'm just kidding.
we could just keep no.
That doesn't work, people. It doesn't
But then
work.
we just take the snippets that people actually want to. Yeah.
Perfect.
Any last thoughts for people if they're a learner, if they're a corporation? Like, what would be sort of your like last, like, if there's one thing you could kind of end this on, what would you want to share?
I think probably like most things in life, there's massive value in being deliberate in, why are you doing this thing in the first place? How are you going to know if you've achieved that? And how can you apply the learning to improve the performance for next time? Whether you're a learner or on the design or delivery side, or thinking about budgets for your people development, what are you trying to achieve with it? Does it matter to you? There's sort of a gut check component, right? Like, does this actually matter? How are you going to measure success? And then how are you going to iterate so you can improve for next time?
Yeah. Just because it's available doesn't mean you have to do it.
Right?
Right.
So
I
much
think
content.
we're there's so much, and we can't take it all in. So it's really looking at, why do I need to do this? Why is this important?
Mhm.
And I love that you really focus on the why, because I do too.
I think the caveat that I'll put on there too is that I'm not, if you want to learn something for the sake of the enjoyment of learning, go for it. I just watched a 55-minute video with no
Yeah,
intention going into it of applying. Took some notes. I probably won't reference them again, but it was educational and enlightening and sort of freed me up. So that's totally cool. But just acknowledge why you're doing it, right? And if that's the reason, great. Just know that that may not lead to lasting behavior change, and that may be totally cool. But there's a difference between content consumption and active application.
absolutely. There's not going to be a lot of active application from some content, and that
Yeah,
is perfectly okay, right? We don't have to action on every single thing that we learn
yeah,
and
exactly.
see.
That's it.
Yeah, amazing.
Nice.
Thank you so much, Chris, for being here with me. This was super fun. Love this conversation. And how can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, good question. So the company is at actionable.co, actionable.co. I think it's right there.
It's
And
right there. Very good.
I'm probably best on LinkedIn. So there's a whole lot of Chris Taylors, but if you do Chris Taylor Actionable, you'll find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. I will not be doing Live with Laura next week. I am flying to Indiana for my keynote with Notre Dame. So I'm skipping next week. I'll be quite jet lagged, but I will see you all in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Luke.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.